Okay.
Mhm.
Okay. Okay. So the winter solstice and the coming of the sun. We see here in the center of our screen the picture of, in some traditions, Helios, the divine being that represents the sun. In one of the Latin or Roman mystery cults, and the word that we have from Latin sol to mean sun, but as a deity soul. And in the times of the Christian era, and subsequently, there was a practice of this religion that they had a lot of different festivals and rites that would be carried out. And one of them towards the end of the year was called Saturnalia. And it was a festival. I think it lasted a week long, and it concluded with the festival and the rites of Sol Invictus. And maybe you've heard that before, Sol Invictus. Many believe that Constantine himself was actually had a symbol of a cross on his shield and saw the symbol of a cross in the sky actually represented this mystery religion, Sol Invictus, that then later became a political movement to create the Universal Church, or the Catholic Church, to put all religions under one Roman rule, and was known as the Universal Catholic Church. But prior to that, there were many different practices taking place, many different forms of Christianity, many different forms of deity worshiping, and in the relationship of all religions, as we gave an introduction. Unfortunately, that was prior to the recording, but that in all religions, there was a relationship of three forms that are always offered. There's an exoteric version where the symbols and the study of them are on the outside. The exoteric form, and where we get most of the forms and the writings of information about religions that we have now, were the exterior forms. Then there was a mesoteric, or a middle point, that consisted of people following the traditions, but in a more regimented way. Then there was the esoteric part, and we can see these same patterns in the religions that we have of today. Like, for instance, many people follow the exoteric form of Christianity, where they go once a week to church and then they pretty much go back to their life. But then there's others that live a life that is oriented towards all the facets and trying to go deeper and deeper inside of that teaching, and that join fellowships and Bible studies, and then sacrifice and share their time to help others receive the teachings. And that would be the mesoteric form. But then within that, there is always an esoteric, or a hidden part that we don't see, and that today, why it's so difficult for us to understand these ancient teachings, just like it will at some point in the future when we look back at us now, to understand what really was happening on the inside, the things that weren't written down. You think, like, for instance, this Zoom meeting, that it's being sent out through the internet, but 100,000 years from now, books or images might be saved, but what was being said and what was being shared and what was really being experienced, that's going to be lost. And so the same is for these ancient teachings, that the inner part was being conveyed, teacher to disciple, and practiced in the intimacy of places secluded from the public, so that the depth could really be gone into, and the deepening of the experience could be lived. Because throughout our understanding of anything that we're doing, we have to set aside time to really go deep into anything. And now we live in a world that where we just scratch the surface, and sometimes we just click a button and we feel like, oh, I got it. I understand this, or I just read an article and I know about this. And the danger for us as a humanity is that we lose our depths as individuals and souls to really go deep into things. But before we go deep into them, we have to try to understand the way that they make sense for us to know if we should go deep into them. So at this time, they celebrated Saturnalia, which was sort of a day where roles were reversed, and the rich would serve the poor or the servants, and opening of gifts and all of these things. And in the end, it would conclude with the practice of Sol Invictus, or the worship of Sol Invictus. This is understanding as the deity of the sun as an individual named Sol, and that Invictus means to conquer, or that it is unconquerable. And the relationship in this study and these teachings can be seen in all the events of life, just like I talked about, or we have shared before, that religions rise and fall, teachings come and go. For as long as we can recall, things emerge, they stay for a while, then they go away, and then something else comes to replace it. And this is a pattern that's in the human psyche because it's in the natural relationship of creation. For instance, every night, the sun, that is our source from a physical point of view of all life and heat and warmth, disappears each night or dies each night. And that light that is unified and very unique and intimate to us for our life is dispersed in billions and billions of little lights. And this starts to put us in connection with this understanding of the mysteries of Osiris, that the death of Osiris and the scattering of all of the parts of that being into the darkness or the underworld. And so we know, and I believe that they knew as well, that all of these stars are actually suns themselves. And the same source that is behind our sun, the unconquering and unquenchable power of the light of our sun, though it's obscured from us now, being on the other side of the world, is being sent from every other sun, which we call stars in the sky. The same force and the same source. And so there was a misunderstanding. We have a misunderstanding believing that these ancient peoples, because exoterically this may have been the way, but esoterically it was understood that the sun wasn't a person or a god. It was a representation of what stands beyond that, the real source of life and light. And that symbol of light is such a magical, powerful symbol. It cannot be conquered. Do you realize the reason we see the stars at night is because that light is traversing time and space? Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of years of time to see the stars that we see in the sky. That light is not stopped. Light cannot be stopped. It can only be obscured by objects, and that's how we have darkness or shadow. And so this plays very profoundly into all the understanding of what we call religion, but just spiritual traditions, and understanding that in a time like the night, when the main source of life and light dies or is obscured from our experience, it is replaced by millions and billions of fractions of that same source and light. Because you might say, well, our sun is not those, but it is. It is. Our sun is a star as well. And it's not the sun itself that was worshipped. That was the symbol of the exoteric form to represent the real light, life, and love that is behind all creative force. And so stories, some more natural and some more artificial in sense, communicate this, the relationship of the death and rebirth of the sun. Now, this happens in a daily rising and falling. It happens annually, which we'll talk about, that relates to the solstice. But as far as what it represents, the light and the life, it happens millennially. I don't know, however we would measure long periods of time where there's periods where humanity is directly connected and influenced by that force of light and love and life and divinity. And there's points in time where that divinity is obscured and or dead. Like Nietzsche's famous words, God is dead, meaning the impulse inside of our psyches towards an understanding of deity or religion, now using the word religion to relate to the source and the soul longing for it and a teaching that represents that, comes and goes. And it has to be reborn periodically, every 100 years, every 1,000 years. That a representation of that force of life that is cosmic in nature has to be born intimately in this creation, has to be lived. Not so that people believe that something happened. It's not like the traveling sideshow would come to a town and say, let me tell you a story. And we're all like, wow, that's a great story. I'm going to believe that. And let's dedicate our whole life to that. And then let's live our life to that. That's not the way human nature works. For someone to change their life, something has to be profoundly impactful.
We have to be available to that impact is the key. We've got to, for a key to work, there's got to be an availability for that key to enter.
And that's one of the key components of this relationship to this time of the year that's told within the story of the Gospels, which we'll get to a little bit, but the necessity to make room for that new to be born. If you remember your story, some of us maybe grew up Christian. Classic. I was the decreer in one Christmas play. Hear ye, decree from Caesar Augustus. Blah 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 blah. That's the only part I remember. But telling the story that Joseph and Mary had to leave and that there was no room for them in the inn. Really, no room for this divine mother. No room in this world for that light to be born, which is why it was hated continually. And this story in form and formation is told over and over and over and over again. For instance, and as I do in preparation for something, I look at and reflect on something and think, wow, I'd like to do the whole class on that, but we can't do that. But we will in the future, possibly, the story of Hamlet, which is the story, Hamlet, the name and why this came to me recently was at the end of a retreat, we were flying back. I don't know if you remember, it was several years ago, we watched a movie called The Northman. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you realize that was a representation of the story of Hamlet, because Hamlet was the story of a Scandinavian or king of Denmark. And that name, Amulet, means trickster or fool, where the name Hamlet comes from. And it's a story, and, Shakespeare, as we know, of course, it's a play by Shakespeare. And I don't want to spoil it, but if you've read any Shakespeare, everybody dies in the end. Sorry, I just spoiled it, but everybody dies in the end.
Not everybody.
Well,
Most everybody.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the audience gets to leave, but everybody else on the stage is just dead. But it's really fascinating, this story that was the Northmen, and it's the same story as the Lion King, where the king is killed by his brother to usurp his power. The same story of Osiris, who was killed by Set, and that his son, in this case Hamlet, sees the ghost of his father, who tells him, who's also named Hamlet, who tells him that his brother Claudius had killed him and he wants to be avenged. So in this pursuit, he goes through all sorts of reflections of life and death and seriousness and humor, to come to realize what he needs to do. And a brilliant facet that Shakespeare uses in this, inside to illustrate very similarly what we're talking about, inside the story, the reality of the death of his father, the king, he gets a troupe of actors to put together a play to tell the story of a king that's asleep and is murdered. A play within inside a play. It's a wonderful thing to produce. He's hoping to produce repentance for the brother that had killed him, because he knew that his uncle had killed him. Anyway, it's a fascinating relationship that this story, we can say that it's, again, is it a case of a similar story being told again and again and again? Or is it the relationship of a reality, a truth, a cosmic truth that is known intimately and told through the elements of that time and place, to inspire and to communicate the capacities of the human soul and what's required? Because in the same way, and returning back to the story of Jesus, that Jesus came at a time when humanity was in a dark, dark phase. And that in essence, there were forms of the religion, but the religion itself had been dead. And he comes as a child to avenge the death of his father, the God in heaven. And that he dedicates his life through sacrifice to avenge that death. But the key for us is to understand that that death of what is true is dead in each of us. That we have to relive, to be born into a new state of consciousness, first by producing a place in the world for the mother, the divine mother, which we each have our own divine feminine aspect, to give birth to that new light, the light that cannot be consumed. Again, the light shines throughout all the infinite space. Our sun itself comes to us through thousands and thousands and thousands of miles, and it's not diminished in the least. We have all the capacities that ray is giving to us to utilize, except in a time like now that's become so dark, unfortunately, that what we're doing in this world is producing a means not only by a means that is killing religion, but killing our relationship with the symbol of religion itself, the sun. So much so that what we're putting in the atmosphere, which is so important for us to understand as human beings, that what I have in my atmosphere, my thoughtmosphere, my little realm of beliefs and ideas and concepts, angers and prejudices that I have inside of myself that are surrounding me, don't allow me to receive the love that's freely being given. In the same way that in this globe that we're living, the atmosphere of this planet, that the very force of love and light that comes from the sun, we're not able to receive it. It's causing cancer. It's causing suffering. It's causing gases that are heating the planet because we've so destroyed the world, which is just another representation of this ancient story being told, that we've destroyed the world, our philosophical earth that we are, so that we can't receive. So that if we want to make space to receive a truth, we have so many concepts and ideas, we can't accept it. We can't accept it. And that's why all the religions are fighting, all the ideals and political beliefs are fighting, because they're all just small, tiny fractions of truth. And that we don't see that at the core, it's the same truth. And so we're willing to die and worse, kill for that. And that was mimicked in the relationships of the apostles, that they weren't prepared to die for the truth that they'd received. In the end, they were, which is why they were all but one, as we know, were martyred, killed for that truth, the same truth that Jesus died for. Prior to that, they were willing to defend Jesus with their lives. I will kill for you. But they weren't ready to die. And those are two elements that we really have to understand, and why in the Shakespearean plays, why everybody dies. Because everything, in order for a real truth, a real new thing to be, rather than just to exist, what exists has to die. Which doesn't mean our physical body necessarily needs to die, but that is why we, from a spiritual point of view, why we die as human beings. And why the teachings are given for us to receive eternal life, the ability to live without dying. Because what we have is eternal death. That this soul, which is a fraction of that great solar force that is unconquerable, is placed in bodies that are conquered continually by our own thoughts and feelings and parts of the world. So that eternal soul has to live through thousands and thousands of deaths. And that is what I believe is the greatest sacrifice that this divine presence of light is giving humanity. It is giving itself, sacrificing itself perpetually in each of us, in everything in this world, because that Christic light or solar principle, which we use the term Christic because Christ is not just a person, it's a principle, but not a principle like an idea. It's a principle of value, a quality of an eternal, or better said, infinite nature that is symbolized by light, because light is infinite. It cannot die. It can only be obscured. That solar principle is reborn in everything that exists and subsequently dies with everything that dies. And so that love of this great divine creator dies from moment to moment in everything that exists, eternally, waiting for the chance, for the moment that may be right here for you right now to realize that there is something more, that I have a hope that's greater than that. And the hope is to embody, to incarnate that internal nature and subsequently create a new birth that can live forever. But in order for that to take place, there's a lot of work that has to be done. A lot of death that I have to submit to, not physically, but psychologically. Because it's the psychological attachments to life that causes our suffering. That we need to remove those psychological attachments, because we know that everything that's here eventually is going to be gone. And the more attached I am to that thing, that object, that piece of clothing, that house, that physical security, when that goes away, psychologically, I'm going to suffer. So if I can die or remove my attachment to that suffering by sacrifice and will, by choosing something that is transcendent to that from moment to moment, then I have the capacity, the possibility of freeing myself. And so little by little, which is why I was impacted as I put this together, this relationship of the sun that leaves and becomes millions of suns. Because that's what happens. This one unitotal solar principle that has become our soul and potential spirit has been fractioned millions and millions of times to every thought and identity and perception that I have in the world, that I claim, I believe this, I am that, you are something else. All of these divisions that we create, which is produces the separatism of this world, not because men and women are different, or different races are different, or different cultures are different, but because the very core of everything that I believe, my beliefs are different, one from another. The belief or the identity around lust is different than the identity of pride or vanity. And the reason we suffer so much in this world is because we have conflicting values inside of ourselves. But we've gotten so accustomed to pushing them down that we don't even feel the pain that we're going through. Because we've replaced this longing for an eternal loving creation and creator with a series of things to do to occupy myself so that I don't feel the absence of that. And a time like this, in this season, it's a great opportunity to try to produce some space to feel that feeling. Something that Judith was sharing when we were at a retreat, that all of this separation that we have in the world and pain that we're not aware of kind of mimics the grieving process, that we're grieving a loss of something that we're not even aware of. And that's what's the first phase of grieving, is
Denial.
Mm-hmm. To deny that, or let's affirm, I'm okay. I don't need a religion, or I don't need X, Y, and Z. I don't need a relationship. I don't need. That's a denial. So,
but it does buffer us. I mean, that's why the first phase of grief is denial, is because it buffers us from feelings we're not ready to feel, or not willing to feel, or don't have the support to feel yet. So a teaching such as this, a community such as this, comes in to help us prepare to feel the missing of the divine from our lives and from our hearts, so because there's a certain amount of grief that comes with that. I know for myself, when I first started to meditate, I met that grief because I recognized, I felt for the first time how much I had been missing that. And then immediately I began to seek for support to be able to do something with that. Otherwise, we just have to run away from it or inoculate ourselves with shopping, sex, drugs, alcohol, a career, whatever. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Until a moment like that, or we come in contact with something that we can't deny or we can't let go. And so the story of Hamlet was to see his father, who tells him what has happened. because that's part of what we're running away from is like, well, it's okay if I don't know about it. But once I know it, it's like, well, I got to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And can I? Will I? And is it the right thing? And all then, because then that feeling goes back up into the mind. And then, well, what do I do? How do I do it? And so that produces a question or a searching. And that is told through this story as well. It's very interesting that in the story of Jesus, what happens is the wise men, the wise individuals, they follow the brightest star out of all of those stars. So once we start to form or find a truth, or we contact in what we call in Gnosis the essence, or an aspect of our consciousness where we feel it, and I'll finish your story, is it emotionally impacted you. Mm-hmm. It brought you to tears. Mm-hmm. And so, and what happens is in those moments, they happen in life, sometimes for brief moments around the loss of a loved one or the experience of something new, and we can't deny it, but it's not comfortable. And so we either run away further or we realize, wow, okay, that moment expanded something in me. I felt it. It might have felt uncomfortable or painful, but I felt the life in that. I felt a purpose, a need now that I can't rest with that. I have to do something. And that's the story of the avenging of, I have to rectify this situation. And the story of Osiris is that Horus had to go down into the underworld to get the last pieces of his father, God, and to remember him, to put him back together. And why the relationship of remembering is putting together all of the things that we didn't have in our awareness. That we forgot. And in the work, we start to create this one focal point, and it's illustrated. And of course, there's so many ways to explain and communicate different aspects of these teachings. So I have the great disclosure to put in that everything I say is true, but anything else could be completely true as well. But the point is to put together and to understand things from a point of view that helps us to move, to work. And so the wise men, the ones seeking wisdom, seeking a change, seeking knowledge, follow this brightest star in the space that points the way to the birth or the real incarnation that begins very simply, and it begins in the darkest time, in the darkest, sometimes it's told as a cave or a stable, surrounded by animals. And that with the recognition, they gave this child, this incarnation of this light, their prized elements as an offering. Meaning we have to sacrifice, we have to give something of ourselves once we find the truth and have the possibility of really helping that truth to be developed. We want to sacrifice and give for that.
And it's, that's such a slippery slope of a word, sacrifice, because it can have a negative connotation to a lot of people. And it can be used very negatively, but really it's about reciprocity, like having a reciprocal relationship. And one of our teachers has said, well, love is active, it's alive, it's a verb. And so if it's not reciprocated, it's incomplete, it's not fully love. And so sacrifice is really about reciprocity. There's an exchange. We're receiving a lot, whether we recognize it or not. And so it's about reciprocating. And what we reciprocate is something really intimate. And the more we get to know ourselves and what needs to die within us, what we really need to let go of in order to open up to making a connection with our own inner divinity, is what we need to die to, those obscurations of the light that are within us. And for each of us, I mean, there's more, and we have more in common as humans than not, so there's more in common, and yet it's nuanced for each of us. And so for some, they have to die to their vanity, first and foremost, to be willing to be natural enough to make contact with something true inside, and kind of let go of all the fakeness on the outside. Well, not all of it, but at least some of it, enough of it.
Enough.
And others have to let go of their resentment and their rage and their anger, that just consume so much of their attention and energy, and create such a division inside of themselves, like Jekyll and Hydeness. And so for each of us, it's an investigation, and that's an investigation that we get into in these teachings of, what do I need to let go of? What do I need to die to? What is obscuring that light from penetrating my heart and penetrating my mind, and me having this reciprocal, natural relationship, being able to just converse with God or even feel anything about that. And that's the sacrifice, so we bring to that symbol of the sun in the world, symbolized by that Christ child, we bring our gold, our myrrh, which is a symbol of death. It's the incense that relates with death, and our frankincense, those precious things, or things that we cling to, but we want to give something real, not just like, well, sometimes we give like, I wasn't really using this thing anyway, so you can have it. It doesn't really, there's not a lot of feeling behind it, but when we give a gift, like
The thing that's more dear to
something
us.
that I find, I'm like, wow, that is so nice. I'm going to give it to my sister.
Which is why the symbol, there's two symbols that in this story told universally. In the Jewish aspect, one of the aspects was that Abraham had to sacrifice his son. You think, why would God ask you to kill your son? It's a symbol of a communication of giving to God, doing what God asks of me, no matter what the cost. And of course, in the end, he didn't have to, but he had to be willing to give what was most dear. And another version, and many more versions, are the relationship of the hero and the hero's journey. He has to go through, or she has to go through, all of these overwhelming, complicated scenarios, risking his or her life, that through the process comes back transformed, so that when he returns or she returns back to her homeland, it's not the world that had changed, but they had changed through that process, how they relate to the world. Subsequently, that actually in time changes the world. It's a funny process that we can't comprehend with our minds, like, because the mind says, well, I'll change if you change. I can't change because you're like this, and I'm just going to lose. And that's why the name Hamlet, why the name the Fool, it's the path of the fool. It doesn't make sense
On worldly
terms until in the moment, what you need to do. And that's the key for us, is to find not an understanding of the big picture, but what I know I need to do in this moment. For instance, with Hamlet, I know I need to avenge my father's death. I don't know how to do it, but I know I need to do it. We know that we need to do something differently. And the whole world is going to maybe not coincide with that. It's going to struggle against us. And that was represented in the story of Horus, to avenge his father's death,
The
Egyptian deity Horus, on this is known as the boat of Ra, that he carried the sun through the 12 parts of the day and the 12 parts of the night. And if you've been here, you've probably seen me. I've shown the image of Isis that has like the 7 chakras on the spine, the 7 points that the sun reach as she devours every night and then gives birth to in the morning. Newt, yes. Newt, Isis, yes. And then this story, so Horus in this story knows that he needs to avenge his father's death, but there's a problem. Not only was he killed, but the parts of his body were dispersed throughout the world. And if you think finding a needle in a haystack's tough, right? Try to find an arm
on a continent.
On a continent. Yeah, it's like, so it's a symbol of the complexity of what that needs to be. And to remember Osiris, or to remember the being, remember the spirit, is that symbol to put it back together, to put the separate parts back together. And in the Egyptian pantheon, they represent the sun in 3 ways. But it's a relationship of this story on a grander scale. So we have the birth and the death daily, the daily work, but the annual work. And so that you understand, solstice means the furthest point north that the sun goes in relation to the earth, or the furthest point the sun goes south. Like our brothers and sisters in Australia now, they're celebrating their summer solstice, the longest days of the year. Mm-hmm. When us in the north, and us that are in the north, in Vancouver and above, those of you that are even higher up there, you realize that we are in the darkest day. Tomorrow is supposed to be the darkest day of the year, the shortest day of the year. So that's the relationship. Why Christmas is celebrated on the 25th, because it's the celebration of the conquering or the reconquering of the sun. Not that the sun was ever conquered, but it was obscured by what? By the relative relationship of the world. Now we have to apply this to ourselves, that the spiritual principles inside of ourselves get obscured by our own relative understanding and relationship to our life and our world. And so that we have this cross, this great cross that's created in the heavens of the sun and the earth. And that in this furthest point, we as the earth tilt back. That then now we start to begin our tilting towards the sun. It's a symbol of the human being honoring, bowing its head towards the sun, towards the solar principles. That starts at this tomorrow. Can I say this today? It's tomorrow, the 21st, but this is, what we're celebrating, the shortest day of the year, which symbolizes the death. The furthest point that the sun is from us up here, for those of you who would like this symbol, that if we were looking at the way that the sun rises on the horizon, furthest south, furthest south, furthest south, and the longest night, then it starts from that point, it starts to come back. But it looks like for 3 days, that the sun stands still in that furthest part, because the first is when it's almost as far, the next is, it's hard to see with the sun, but we always show it to the relationship of the moon and the full moon. I know we've all done that. You look up, oh, is the moon full? I think it's full. And then you look the next night, oh, now it's full. Mm-hmm. And then the next night you're like, oh, it looks full. And then you realize, oh, now it's waning, waxing. It's going the other direction. Waning, yes, was waning. And so in this great cross, there's 2 points. In spring, the equinox, And in fall, the equinox, meaning equal night, meaning day and night are equal. That then for us in June 21st, the sun is the closest relative to the north of the hemisphere that we live in, and the days are the longest, which is the completion of the reconquering of the sun, where it's taken its position back again, and then we start to go away, or it goes away from us until now we find ourselves in the shortest day of the year. And this cycle is the same cycle that happens, and it happens in the humanities and the psyches of people, where the divine principles seem to go, because they do not go. It's a relationship of the world and our relationship to it, that it seems as though God has left us. It seems as though the divine principles are not here, but they're obscured. They're still there doing everything they've always done. But the impetus comes on the individual, the initiate, to initiate a new relationship to this manifestation of the divine. That in the darkest of the days, the solstice of the winter, we acknowledge on that 21st as if the sun has completely died for us. And in some parts, in northern Canada, Alaska, days last for days, or nights last for days. Darkness completely. But then the symbol for us that can see it, on the 25th, we realize, oh, the sun has been born again. It's new. And from that point on, it's developing and growing. And eventually it goes towards the spring time period, the equinox, where we celebrate the actual death and rebirth of that sun in the spring equinox, where it shows that it's equal again. Now, Easter itself and that symbol, it changes because it's a combination of the solar and lunar calendars. And Easter is celebrated as the first Sunday after the first full moon after the spring equinox. So it moves. But that is another event or advent on this great cosmic relationship of the rise and fall of the divine principles in this world. It's happening in nature. It's happening in the minds and hearts of all of the people in this planet. And it happens in lives of ourselves. We spend lives where we feel very self-sufficient and very separated. And we have very dark periods in our human experiences where we feel as if we're all alone. That great story that we have that you can Google it, Footprints, God. I think that's all you need. You'll get it, where it shows the footprints walking on the beach, and the soul dies and goes back to the Creator in heaven, and saying that he looks down and sees these two pairs of footprints, and he sees that God tells him that was me walking with you all along. And then the human says, but what about this point? And he looks where he can remember the darkest points of his life. He says, there's only one pair of footprints there.
As if I was alone.
As if I was alone. And he said, that's because that was the time when I was carrying you. Because this relates to an unseen principle. It has to be intuited and comprehended deep inside of our consciousness. And it transcends the physical senses. It transcends the emotional desires. It transcends the concepts and ideas of what we have about creation. So those desires have to be removed enough, because those are the things that obscure our perception of the divine. And in the Egyptian pantheon, this relationship, they show this relationship of the reconquering of the sun, or the symbol of eternal life, which is the solar orb up above the cross, which represents eternal life, the Ankh. And you'll see deities that hold the Ankh. They're the ones that have achieved immortality. And not because it was a belief, It was a representation of a truth. That immortality is it's not only a possibility or potential of a human soul, it is the nature and requirement, because the human soul is eternal. The reality is that this eternal nature is being obscured by this body and these senses and these desires and these concepts. So you see that as long as this sense of I believe this and I believe that takes us so far, or takes us too far away from the divine principle, it has to be removed. These obstacles have to be removed. And it's not an easy process. It's not just, oh, I want to be different, so I'm going to be different. Try that. See how that works. It's not that easy. We need a teaching from those that have removed these parts of themselves, that have incarnated. And that's why masters such as Jesus, such as Buddha, Muhammad, Joan of Arc, Kuan Yin, all of these different entities that are left in myth, which become mythologies, but before that were legends, but before that were stories, and before that was the truth. The same thing is happening now. I believe in Christianity, or I believe in Buddhism. Belief is only going to take us so far. We have to step outside of the concepts of belief. We have to live. And it's a very difficult thing. It's not as easy as we said. And we have to feel it. We have to feel the impulse from inside. And we have to find ways to keep that impulse alive, because the world is going to continually try to kill it, destroy it, which is what we hear in these representations all of the time. And in the Egyptian pantheon, the sun was represented in three forms. The god Num, and you see the solar force over his head, as a ram, which is a symbol like we have of Aries, a symbol of the fire and the force of life. The creator god was worshipped in the morning. The symbol of Horus, the falcon, the sun at midday, and the scarab, Kepra, the beetle god, represented the force of the sun at the end of the day, the dying day, with the rich color red. Going to have to, okay. So I think this is fascinating, so I'm going to share it with you, because we can talk about, oh yeah, this sounds like this and this sounds like that, but some of the things are almost identical. It's amazing that these teachings, for instance, we find in the book of John, in the beginning was the Word. We've probably heard that. The Word was with God. The Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And it goes on to say that in him, meaning the masculine principle that was being represented, it's not that God is a male. God is male, female. God is beyond male and female. But when God acts, it's represented as masculine. When God receives, it's represented as feminine. And that gets lost as well throughout time. But it says, in him was life, and that life was the light of mankind. Again, remembering that light is that infinite principle that cannot be stopped. That the light shines into the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. So in this process, what happens is that light becomes part of one's constitution, and with the purpose of revenging the death of the Father, remembering the parts of the being, one has to take that light and then go into the underworld, which is told in many, many myths to find the parts of the being or to battle darkness in one way or another. But that light that we use has to be, or the light that we have has to be used. And as we use it, we begin to comprehend the darkness that cannot comprehend the light. And that is the way that we start to remove ourselves from the different concepts and ideas that obscure it. We think in an upside down way that it is these concepts and ideas that make me a rational, intelligent individual. But it's a partial truth, because we build a truth upon our own sense of understanding instead of the understanding of the soul itself that's infused with the light of creation. And in this way, we don't comprehend the darkness, and the darkness will never comprehend the light. But once we comprehend or see the light, we can start to use the light, start to realize that the problems, the change that needs to happen is not outside. Because that's the first trick that happens, is the change is outside. I have to fix the world. I have to change my circumstances. The reality is, like the journey of the hero, I have to change myself little by little. And it takes time. It takes will and willingness and time. So here we have this. We've probably heard it. Amazing. But I don't know if you realize in the Mandukya Upanishad on the exposition of Om, the one word or the one syllable, it says, this is the beginning. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm out of order. This comes from the Popol Vuh. This is the beginning of the ancient word. This comes from the Mesoamerican tradition. This is the beginning of the ancient word, the potential and source for all things, the account of how things were put in shadow and brought to light. The creation story of the Maya people. In the Upanishads, it says Om is the imperishable word. Om is the universe, and this is the exposition of Om. The past, the present, the future, all that was, all that is, all that will be is Om, the word. Likewise, all else that may exist beyond the bounds of time, that too is Om. Om is a compound word made of 3 letters, 3 parts that represent a trinity. And it used to be expressed, and they write the sutras around a central core that goes on and on and on and on. Maybe you've seen this written. What's so amazing is now, through techniques of imposing the vibration of the chanting of the word Om over a plate of lycopodium powder, which is just a silica powder, the vibration produces this form that thousands of years ago they expressed very similarly. That this 3-part word, A-U-M, represent 3 deity principles: Agni, the god of fire; Varuna, the god of water; Maruts, the gods of air. Represents the relationship of Om. We have this trinity within the word Om that gives creation to all life. Just like in the Christian tradition, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. In the East, Brahma, Vishnu, Shiva. In the Egyptian, Isis, Osiris, and Horus constitute 3 principles that we see as the Trinity or the Godhead, but even more so, and what I want to close with is this relationship to this relationship of Christ itself. We said the word Christ, and it's become to believe to mean an individual. And it's a time when that teaching needs to be relived. Christ is a principle. It represents the life force of all creation. It is the word that manifests in the East as Om, divine love expressed, the force of all life, the eternal principle, the solar principle that exists in every solar system that has been symbolized as solar religions by the sun itself as a symbol of that divine love, because without the sun, there is no life. Without the Christ, in reality, there is no life. Whether we recognize it or not, we can say, well, I don't believe in the sun, but yet I believe in this black stylus and this red shirt, because that is given to us by the representation of the light that's being absorbed and the light that's being reflected back out. It cannot receive the color red, so that's what's projected back out. So we go through our life saying, I don't believe in God, but I believe in all of these things that are actually reflections or manifestations of God, of the divine.
I remember the last time we drove from Vancouver to Seattle, which we do often, and it was very, very foggy. And I said this out loud. It struck me so much because we were kind of taking it easy, because when you're on the freeway, you're on I-5 and you've got to go relatively fast, but you cannot see in front of you. So it's such a trust plunge. And there would just be like cars like zooming past us. And I'm like, man, if those people don't think they're religious, they are kidding themselves. They have so much faith. They're just like going into what they cannot see with so much courage. It's like, we can do it. We can do it.
And the relationship that we have to this force that we symbolize as faith, for the individual of faith, they see the job that I have, the relationship that I have, as something that's been given to us by the divine. And the rational mind individual says, oh, that's ridiculous that you think that. But that's the relationship. The why we can perceive anything is through the light of the electricity of senses and sensations. The reason we see anything is because of the light that's being shown and reflected through. The way that we hear anything is the vibration, which is symbolized by the ohm, is the sound waves or the force that reverberates off of things. So why in the East they refer to this world as Maya or as illusions, because we attribute all of these things to a creation that we believe has no creator, that has no source. And in Gnosis, the idea is that to have at least a belief, to have faith that there is something more here, and try to connect to that. So in this teaching, we call that Christ, which is not a person or an entity. It is a force that has love, life, and light inside of it. And something that we just saw a movie recently, I want to wrap this up, but it was so beautiful, a movie that we recommend for anyone to see, called Life After Death.
Or After Death.
Just After Death?
Mm-hmm.
After Death.
Mm-hmm.
And it recounts all of these after death stories. And it's beautiful because they express seeing this light that envelops them, and it communicates love and life through it. And they're like, I can't explain it. It was light, it was love, it was life. And it's part of a great Gnostic prayer that we do often that relates to this divine light as love and life. But this Christ has three aspects, just like a Trinity has three aspects. Oops. Hopefully I can go right back to where I was yes. And in the inner parts of the churches, you can see this. I took this from a church in Scotland, but here you see three Christs, or three Jesuses, because there are three Jesuses as there were. There was God, the Son of God, and the Son of Man. And those relate to three qualities that he communicated continually. Three levels of that relationship, which we can say are actually three Christs. The first Christ is what we've been talking about, the cosmic Christ, or the force that radiates through every sun and every solar system throughout the heavens, And it's the unseen principle that's everywhere and within everything. And in a great Gnostic gospel, it says that you lift a stone and I am there, split a piece of wood and I am there. There is nowhere that you can go that I am not. That cosmic principle throughout time has a relationship at the core of each of us, an intimate relationship. And when that Christ is realized inside that intimate Christ, which is a cosmic reflection of that light inside of each of us and our soul, we call that the intimate Christ, our intimate that we have inside, that we can give birth to, that's part of the whole, but it's unique to us as well. It's personal. And that's the teaching that Jesus actually gave. It wasn't he gave that I am the God, that I am an expression of the God that's within you and within you and within everyone. But when that Christ is realized, it becomes the third aspect of the Christ, which we call a historic Christ. And there's as many historic Christs as there are religions in this world. Individuals, entities that realized that intimate expression of the cosmic Christ inside of themselves. And that we think to follow in the footsteps of that religion is what produces the transformation, but it's not. That's the beginning. We have to realize it by the teachings inside of ourselves. That's where the real truth comes. Is the Gnostic Master Samael Onvior says that Jesus Christ could have come 1,000 times and lived his passion, death, and sacrifice 1,000 times, but it would be of no purpose if it's not done inside of you. And that is the studies that we do as a group. We can't communicate all of that in one topic, but the idea is to understand that this is a teaching that's universal, a truth that's been told millions of times, not by repetition or imitation, but by realization, by realizing it inside of themselves and finding people that want to realize it inside of themselves. So this is the conclusion for tonight as a talk. We're going to give a practice in just a moment. I'm just going to do a simple little practice to connect us, to get us in touch with the stillness. Every time that we prepare for a Christmas type topic, be it in the public group or other groups, when I think of meditating, practicing, I think of the song Silent Night. I don't know if everyone knows that song, and we're not going to sing it. But silent night, holy night, all is calm, all is bright. Mm-hmm. That's what I thought. And you get that image, especially for us in the north, that image of pure white, soft snow. And the brightness of the light of the stars reflected off the white of the snow. So we'll use this. Hopefully we can use our imagination to recall, to remember what that's like to be in that stillness where that natural phenomenon of the snow produces an uncharacteristic stillness in nature, where nature has stillness, but this goes beyond that. So without singing, we're going to begin. Eyes closed if possible, or if it gets too difficult to stay focused, we can have them slightly opened in a posture that's comfortable but not too comfortable, with the spine relatively upright. And let's resolve ourselves in this moment to be still as we can, like the stillness that we're hoping to produce in the mind. There's a magical key to stillness that works as we relax and try to make the body still. It has an effect that makes the mind more still. And as we make the effort to not think of anything that's not here in this moment, to not remember anything, to not project about what we need to do after, but really create a space for the advent of the new, of the light in this moment. But even more so, by focusing on the breath. It's amazing that focusing on the breath helps to quiet the mind, quiet the desire to be or do something else, the breath that's with us always. So let's just calmly breathe and be aware of ourselves breathing for a moment. And if our mind leaves, gently but firmly return it to the act of breathing. And now let's use our imagination to imagine that we're seated in the middle of a wonderful forest and nobody else is around. There's no activity happening, but the ground is covered with snow. It's been snowing for the entirety of the day, and now the night has come, and you're seated comfortably amidst the snow in the middle of a forest at the center of the night. The only activity apart from us breathing is that of the light of the stars reflected in the absorptive, fluffy, white snow. And here we perceive the wonderful contrast between the dark, rich night sky and the white, bright snow. And it seems as though we can hear something, but what we're hearing actually is the sound of silence itself. Sometimes this sound of silence sounds like it surrounds us, but it's more inside of us. That when we take the time to remove ourselves from the activities of the world and our thoughts and desires associated with those activities, and sit as silent as we can be, we can hear it, the sound of silence. And here we breathe, enveloped in the white, soft snow that absorbs all the sound that may surround us, at the center of a wonderful forest in the middle of the night, and listening to this sound of silence. And with each inhalation, we feel lighter, more awake, more perceptive to the inner listening. And with each exhalation, we are more relaxed, more at peace, more content. And our task in this practice, along with the visualization, our task is to not be tempted to fill this space with a thought, a memory, a requirement, a need, a desire. Anything that would obscure the silence. Because clearly the silence never goes away. But like the light, it can be obscured by noise. Let's make a commitment in this moment to produce the space of silence for the hope of the new birth of something magical that will not come about by effort or thought or desire, but only in the calm, peaceful absence of thinking and desiring. Now, from our hearts, we give thanks to all of us here that have taken a moment from the busy time of our week, maybe a busy time of year for us in preparation for holidays. We're very grateful for those of you that have taken the time to do this. And each of you give thanks to yourself and all of us here that have taken this time together to be here, to take a moment to produce space, room in our life, in our world, for the possibility of something new and transformative to be born, whatever that may be. And we'll conclude with the representation of that sacred word, Ah, 3 times. Ah.